participate and then to moderate this session, I looked at the title and I was a bit distressed, because for a session dealing with the future of European Jewry, of Jewry in general, it seemed a little bit too upbeat. Thriving or decline, that's very un-Jewish to give us the choice between an optimistic and a pessimistic view. But then I opened the more detailed description and I was reassured, because there I saw assimilation, identity crisis, erosion of internal solidarity, Muslim population, anti-Semitism, political power, dwindling, the young generation going away, and more, etc., etc. And I knew that we were back on our regular ground of how we deal with these topics. The notion of the Jewish people being in an existential crisis is present in our minds for many decades, or probably maybe since we exist on this earth. But since I think that the 20th century brought with it two very fundamental events in Jewish history, the Holocaust on one side, the creation of the State of Israel on the other, we could consider it as a sort of restart of our history, which would justify a shorter view, a shorter historical view than the one that goes back to the first days of our history. And since Europe is a very good laboratory to discuss and to examine the fate and the history and the future of Judaism outside of Israel, because it is so diverse in its communities and has and reflects all the complexities of demographics, culture, structure, organization, politics, etc., etc. It's a good place to look into the topic. Europe, I think, European Jewry also reflects and incarnates well all the difficulties that we have, but others who look onto the Jewish people have in the definition of a people. When it deals with such a large group of people which have so little in common and so much to differ one from the other. Crisis, yes, I think everyone agrees that there is a crisis. There is a crisis for the future of Judaism in the diaspora, some will say, because Jews in the diaspora are a minority and they are under pressure. Others will say that they are in crisis because they are not under pressure, or not anymore under pressure, and that life is actually very comfortable for Jews, and that what actually united them over the years was the outside pressure. On the other hand, people will say that there is also a crisis of Jewish identity here in Israel, because we are not a minority, but we are a majority. And this may be contrary, some would go as far as saying contrary to Jewish DNA. Or others will say that it is so contrary to Jewish history that by some form of evolutionary mutation, it has affected our DNA. All these are very interesting and important topics, and we have a very prestigious and interesting panel of people to discuss it with us today. I will introduce them briefly now and ask each of them to address the audience, the group, for a few minutes, and then we will have a small internal discussion here and open it up to the floor for some questions. We have let's go from the closest to me to the farthest. We have Rabbi Shmuel Riccardo Di Segni, who is the chief rabbi of Rome, of Italy. We have Richard Pasquier, Dr. Richard Pasquier, who apart from being a doctor, a medical doctor, is the president of the CRIF in his second mandate as president of the CRIF, which is the umbrella organization of French Jewish organizations, and past presidents of the French Committee.
So, this is an eternal question whether there is the Jewish, whether the game is over for the Jewish community, and mostly whether the game is over for the European Jewish community. I would say, to begin with, that there is no question the game is not over for the European Jewish community. We have to fight, and we have to fight for many, many different reasons. First, because the European Jewish community is the nucleus where the Jewish life was so active during 2,000 years, and the part they took in the Enlightenment is so important, and this is also the place where the Shoah occurred, and this is also the place where the Zionism, the first the Zionist idea occurred. And the second thing is because the delegitimization process that is taking place against Israel now is being mostly fought in Europe, and this is the reason why we have to fight. So the problems that occur in Europe, and in some way also the problem of Jews in Europe, are also the problems of Europe itself. And we heard this morning the word of disintegration of Europe by by an academic from England, and it may be true that Europe is disintegrating, but the feeling that Europe is weakening is general, and this has some relation with the fact that Jews in Europe also feel that they are in a weakened position, because since in the entire world, in the globalization, in the Asia and Africa, countries without Jews, or countries that become important, like the Muslim countries, where there is hostility against Jews, so it is understandable that Jews will have the feeling that the weight is decreasing. If we are speaking about France, we are now probably one of the only countries where the number of Jews has increased since the years before the war. Statistics in France are very difficult because there is we cannot have any statistics according to religion. The numbers are usually 550,000 or 600,000 Jews. It's compared to 300,000 Jews. Just think that in Europe, before the war, there were 9 million people, 9 million Jews, and now in Europe, the entire Europe, is probably less than 2 million Jews, just to understand how the decrease in demography in Europe has been large. We are the largest Jewish population now because of one reason, but one very specific reason, is the arrival of Jews from North Africa in the year 60, and they changed the entire setting of French Jewry. Now, 70% of Jews in France come from North Africa, from North African origin, and definitely the French Jewry, who was in a difficult situation, has been revived because of the arrival of Jews from North Africa. Demography is a fact, and speaking about whether the decline of European Jewry, it's also, there are facts and there are perceptions. The demographic perception is mostly that Jews are certainly an important population, but they are very small population in France as compared to a new population, the Muslim population, about 10 times as important as the Jewish population in France. And this perception of demographic minority has been emphasized by some thinkers, and I'm relating to a geopolitician named of Pascal Boniface, who very bluntly wrote that the Socialist Party, for instance, should not be interested by Jews because Jews were such a minority as compared with Muslims. Fortunately, this has not held true till now, but the feeling is still persists very high. If we are to measure by some way whether the Jewish community is thriving or not, we try to, well, besides the demographic factor, there are 2, 3 or 4 very important factors, and try to be as brief as possible just relating to them. First one is the religious attendance. The religious affiliation is definitely thriving in France because of the arrival of North African Jews. And there are some very small community, and the problem of small community in Europe will probably be tackled. But most Jews now tend to agglomerate in larger Jewish communities. But definitely the religious attendance synagogues are mostly full. And this revival that we heard in Great Britain, we have it also definitely in France, with the problems with the problems that we probably will facing, problems of not the problem of conversion that it was 60 or 70 years ago, 80 years ago, problem of mixed marriages, and which are major problem for all communities, and I will not develop into it. The problem, the economic problems. Is French Jewry, what is the situation, the economic situation of French Jewry is very similar to the non-Jewish population. Some are wealthy, some are not wealthy. I don't know whether they are an increased economic weight, but one thing is sure which weakens the institutional Jewry is that philanthropy is not as high, is not as important in France as it should be, and this weakens definitely some of our Jewish institutions. Institutional participation of Jews is lower than we would like it to be, and those people who are here and would like to have more participation of Jews in these institutions. But this is a fact. Major factor is culture, identity, and education. It was said, and I cannot agree more, that education is the major issue, and Rabbi Sachs spoke about, and I have nothing to add about it. This is major problem for the entire Jewish world, not only for the world in diaspora, probably also in Israel. We will always be a minority. We will always be a smaller minority. The only way we can survive is by education. This is an extraordinarily important message. The Jewish identity in France is rather strong. I told you about the religious affiliation. I don't know the exact numbers, but probably 15%, 20% of Jews have some real religious regular attendance. But the relation to Israel is extraordinarily high. And it is about 80%. Well, in the last census that I saw, it was about 80% of Jews who said that they had a very special feeling about Israel, and this is something that we can feel all the time. And this has been also increased by the arrival of Jews from North Africa. This is confronted by the usual narratives that Jews see in the newspapers, see in the media, which has increasingly become anti-Israeli. This is an old story, actually. This started in 1967, after the 6 Days War, which means about almost 50 years ago. But this narrative is very pregnant, and this is a major issue, contentious issue now for Jewish life, for Jewish community in France. The political situation. Well, Rabbi Sachs said this morning that to say that Great Britain or France is an anti-Semitic country is not relevant anymore. I totally agree. France is a country where 2 months ago we thought that the second round of presidential election would have a Jew, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, competing against someone who is partly a Jew, who is of Jewish origin. So for an anti-Semitic country, this means a lot. And there was nobody to my knowledge, in the media at least, I don't speak about the extreme right, who was surprised by this fact. So we never had, probably in our history, such anti-Semitic governments fighting against anti-Semitism. The fact is that there is anti-Semitism in the country. There is anti-Semitism. We know now where it comes from. It doesn't come so much from the extreme right. It's the anti-Semitism we're confronting is the anti-Semitism that comes from the extreme left, and under the mask of anti-Zionism, and this is also linked to the Muslim radicalism. The perception of Jews that they are in a country where there is no place for them is, some Jews do have this perception. It is true in France. Some of them think that because of the hindrances to religious practice, shkita, days of examinations and feasts and so on, it will be difficult to practice Judaism in France. It is not true that it is difficult to practice Judaism in France, and sometimes we have to face some difficulties, but these difficulties are minor as compared to what was before. The second major problem, the second major perception, not misperception, but perception, is the fact that there is, as I told you, an increase, the number of Muslims is so much larger than the number of Jews. The fact is, it is a fact, the fact is that most Muslims are totally moderate Muslims, and we have to make a very, very clear distinction between radical Islam and Muslim life. And the third perception... Yes. I must ask you to end with your... Okay. The third perception, which is the most important, is the difference in narratives. Because of the proximity to Israel, Jews hold to this narrative, and they are facing the opposite narrative in the media. So just to conclude, 3 words. We need to have education. We need to have, in our institution, we need to have commitment. And the third one, we need to reach out to the non-Jewish world. We need to reach out for many reasons, and one of the major reasons we need to reach out because we want to change the image of Israel. Thank you.